First, we'll look at the fundamentals of rough sketching. Introduction to rough sketching. Definition and purpose. Rough sketching stands as a fundamental practice in the art of drawing, serving as the initial and exploratory phase where artists create a preliminary outline or layout of their subject matter. This stage, often characterized by its informal and loose nature, is critical for establishing the foundational elements of the artwork. Definition. Rough sketching involves crafting a preliminary representation of the subject, focusing on basic shapes, proportions, and overall composition rather than intricate details. The sketch is intentionally loose, with lines that are more fluid and less precise compared to later stages of drawing. This approach allows artists to experiment and adjust their ideas without the constraints of detailed rendering. Purpose. The primary aim of rough sketching is to lay the groundwork for the final artwork. It serves several key functions. 1. Exploring composition. One of the primary purposes of rough sketching is to explore various compositional options. Artists use this stage to experiment with different arrangements, angles, and perspectives, helping them determine the most effective way to present their subject. By trying out multiple compositions, artists can identify the most compelling and visually engaging arrangement for their final piece. 2. Establishing proportions. Rough sketches help artists to establish and evaluate the proportions of their subject matter. By creating a basic outline, artists can assess the relative sizes and placements of different elements, ensuring that the proportions are accurate and harmonious. This early assessment helps to avoid issues of distortion and imbalance in the final drawing. 3. Planning structure. The rough sketch acts as a blueprint for the structure of the drawing. It provides a framework that guides the artist as they develop more detailed and refined elements. This structural planning is crucial for ensuring that the final artwork maintains coherence and consistency. 4. Facilitating creativity. Rough sketching encourages creativity by allowing artists to explore and experiment with different ideas and approaches. The informal nature of the sketching process enables artists to think outside the box and consider unconventional solutions. This creative freedom is essential for discovering new techniques and styles that can enhance the overall quality of the artwork. 5. Previewing the final piece. A rough sketch provides a preliminary preview of what the final artwork will look like. It helps artists to visualize the overall impact and effectiveness of their composition before committing to more detailed work. This preview allows for adjustments and refinements to be made early on, resulting in a more polished and cohesive final piece. Importance in the drawing process. Rough sketching holds significant importance throughout the drawing process for several reasons. 1. Visualization and experimentation. Rough sketches offer a means for artists to quickly visualize and experiment with different ideas and compositions. By sketching out various possibilities, artists can determine which approach best captures their vision and objectives. This stage is essential for exploring multiple options and refining the artistic concept before proceeding to more detailed work. 2. Guide for detail and refinement. Once the rough sketch is completed, it serves as a guide for adding details and refining the artwork. The preliminary outline helps artists to stay focused on the overall structure and ensures that subsequent layers of detail are consistent with the initial vision. This guidance is crucial for maintaining coherence and avoiding deviations from the intended design. 3. Identification and correction of mistakes. Rough sketches provide an opportunity to identify and correct mistakes early in the drawing process. Since the sketch is less detailed, it is easier to make adjustments and modifications without disrupting the entire piece. This early detection of errors helps artists to address issues related to proportions, composition, and perspective before investing significant time in more intricate stages of the drawing. 4. Efficiency and time management. By creating a rough sketch, artists can work more efficiently and manage their time effectively. The preliminary outline helps to streamline the drawing process, allowing artists to focus on refining specific areas rather than grappling with the entire composition. This efficiency contributes to a more organized and well-structured final artwork. 5. Foundation for creativity. Rough sketching lays the foundation for creative exploration and innovation. It provides a platform for artists to experiment with different techniques, styles, and approaches before finalizing their design. This creative freedom fosters artistic growth and enhances the overall quality of the artwork. 6. Enhanced problem solving. The rough sketching phase offers a valuable opportunity for problem solving. As artists work through their initial ideas, they may encounter challenges related to composition, proportion, or perspective. Addressing these challenges during the rough sketching stage allows for a more thoughtful and effective resolution, leading to a more successful final piece. 7. Building confidence. Engaging in rough sketching can help build confidence in the artistic process. By experimenting and making adjustments early on, artists gain a clearer understanding of their subject and their own abilities. This confidence carries over into the more detailed stages of drawing, resulting in a more assured and accomplished final artwork. In conclusion, rough sketching is an indispensable part of the drawing process, offering numerous benefits that contribute to the success of the final artwork. By providing a preliminary framework for composition, proportion, and structure, it enables artists to visualize their ideas, experiment with different approaches, and refine their work with greater efficiency. The importance of rough sketching lies in its ability to lay the groundwork for a well-crafted and compelling piece, making it a crucial practice for artists at all levels. Tools and materials. Choosing the right paper. The choice of paper is fundamental to the drawing process, particularly for rough sketches. The right paper can significantly impact your sketching experience, ensuring that your work progresses smoothly and the final outcome meets your expectations. 1. Paper texture and weight. Texture. Paper texture affects how the pencil interacts with the surface. For rough sketches, opt for paper with a slight texture, such as a vellum or cold-pressed surface. This texture allows the pencil to grip the paper better and provides a more controlled line. Weight. The weight of the paper is another crucial factor. Medium weight paper, approximately 80 to 120 lb, is ideal for rough sketches as it supports multiple layers of graphite without warping. Heavier paper can be used for more detailed work, but medium weight paper offers a good balance for preliminary sketches. Sketchbooks versus loose sheets. Sketchbooks. Using a sketchbook with spiral bindings can be beneficial for rough sketching. The spiral binding allows you to easily flip pages, and the bound format keeps your sketches organized. Additionally, the sketchbook can be more portable and convenient for on-the-go work. Loose sheets. If you prefer working on loose sheets, consider using a clip pad or a drawing board to keep the paper steady. Loose sheets offer more flexibility if you want to detach and work on different sheets individually. Selecting pencils and erasers. Choosing the right pencils and erasers is essential for achieving different effects and maintaining control over your sketch. 1. Graphite pencils. Pencil grades. Graphite pencils come in a range of grades, from hard H to soft B. For rough sketches, softer pencils like 2B or 4B are ideal. They create darker, richer lines that are easier to manipulate during the initial stages of drawing. Line quality. Softer pencils produce thicker, darker lines which are beneficial for establishing the basic structure of your drawing. They are also easier to smudge and blend, which can be useful for shading and creating depth. 2. Erasers. Kneaded erasers. Kneaded erasers are highly versatile and valuable for sketching. They can be shaped to fit into small areas and are excellent for lifting graphite to create highlights or correct mistakes without damaging the paper. They also allow for precise adjustments, which is crucial during the rough sketching phase. Other erasers. While kneaded erasers are preferred, having a few different types, such as precision tip erasers or rubber erasers, can be helpful for various corrections and adjustments. Additional tools. 1. Rulers and protractor. Rulers. For precise measurements and straight lines, a ruler is indispensable. It helps in creating accurate proportions and maintaining symmetry in your drawing. Transparent rulers can also be helpful as they allow you to see your sketch through the ruler. Protractors. A protractor is useful for measuring and drawing angles. This is particularly useful if your sketch involves geometric shapes or if you need to maintain specific angles for parts of the character. 2. Blending stumps. Purpose. Blending stumps are used for smoothing out pencil lines and creating even shading. They are especially useful for transitioning between different shades and creating a more polished look. Usage. When using a blending stump, gently rub it over the shaded areas to blend the graphite smoothly. Be careful not to overuse it, as it can erase or lighten parts of your sketch if applied too aggressively. 3. Pencil sharpener. Types. A good quality sharpener is essential for maintaining your pencils in optimal condition. Choose between a manual sharpener with a blade or an electric sharpener for convenience. A sharp pencil point allows for finer lines and more detailed work. 4. Fixatives. Usage. While not always necessary for rough sketches, a fixative can be used to set the graphite and prevent smudging if you plan to add further details or layers to your drawing. Spray fixatives should be used in a well-ventilated area and applied in light, even coats. Basic sketching techniques. Drawing basic shapes. 1. Introduction to basic shapes. Basic shapes such as circles, squares, and triangles are fundamental to creating a well-proportioned and accurate drawing. These shapes serve as the foundation for more complex forms and are crucial in building up the basic framework of your subject. Circles. Circles are versatile shapes used to represent various parts of the body. For instance, in character drawing, circles are often used to construct the head, shoulders, and joints. Circles can help in defining the volume of the head and the curvature of the body. They also assist in understanding the spatial relationships between different parts of the body. Squares and rectangles. These shapes are particularly useful for constructing the torso, limbs, and other rectangular features of the body. They help in creating the structure of the body by defining the width and length of various parts. For example, a rectangle can be used to represent the torso, while smaller rectangles can indicate the limbs. Triangles. Triangles are helpful for creating dynamic poses and angular features. They can be used to define the direction of the body and limbs, and they help in establishing the overall movement and energy in the pose. Triangles are also useful for depicting sharp angles and points, such as the chin or the tips of the hair. 2. Building the framework. Begin by sketching simple shapes to map out the general structure of your subject. For drawing samurai, start with a circle for the head, a rectangle for the torso, and lines or rectangles for the limbs. This step is essential for ensuring that the proportions are correct and that the overall structure of the character is accurately represented. Place the shapes in relation to one another to form a rough outline of samurai's body. For example, the head should be positioned relative to the torso, and the limbs should be placed according to the desired pose. Use the circle for the head as a guide for placing facial features and to ensure that the head is proportionate to the body. Adjust the size and placement of the shapes as needed. For instance, if the limbs appear too short or too long in relation to the torso, modify the rectangles accordingly. The goal is to create a cohesive framework that will serve as the basis for further detailing. 3. Refining the shapes. Once you have the basic shapes in place, begin refining them to create a more accurate representation of your subject. Transform the circle into a more defined head shape by adding guidelines for the facial features, such as the eyes, nose, and mouth. Adjust the shapes of the torso and limbs to reflect the specific design of samurai. For example, you may need to modify the rectangle for the torso to include curves and details that match her outfit and body shape. Pay attention to the proportions and relationships between different parts of the body. Ensure that the head, torso, and limbs are proportionate and that the overall figure maintains a balanced appearance. Use the refined shapes as a guide for adding more detailed features and elements. 4. Combining basic shapes. Integrate the basic shapes to form a more cohesive and complete sketch. Begin by merging the circles, squares, and triangles to create a unified figure of samurai. This process involves connecting the shapes and refining their edges to create a smooth and continuous outline. Use the combined shapes as a guide for adding details such as clothing, accessories, and facial features. For instance, if samurai has a distinctive hairstyle or outfit, incorporate these elements into the sketch by building upon the basic shapes. Continuously evaluate the overall structure and proportions as you work. Make adjustments as needed to ensure that the figure remains accurate and well proportioned. The goal is to create a solid foundation for further detailing and refinement. Establishing proportions and composition. 1. Using guidelines. Guidelines are essential tools for maintaining accurate proportions and ensuring that the various parts of your drawing are in harmony. Start by drawing a central vertical line to divide the figure into symmetrical halves. This line will serve as a reference for placing facial features, limbs, and other elements. Add horizontal lines to mark key points such as the eyes, shoulders, and hips. These lines help in aligning the facial features and ensuring that they are proportionate to the rest of the figure. For example, if you're drawing samurai's face, use horizontal lines to place the eyes at the correct height relative to the rest of the head. Use additional guidelines to map out the placement of limbs, hands, and feet. For instance, you can draw lines to indicate the position of the elbows and knees, which will help in ensuring that the limbs are correctly positioned and proportionate. 2. Proportional reference points. Proportional reference points are crucial for maintaining consistency and accuracy in your drawing. One common method is the head count technique, where the height of the body is measured in terms of the size of the head. For example, if samurai's head is a certain size, you can use that measurement to determine the length of her torso and legs. Identify key reference points on the figure, such as the top of the head, the shoulders, and the waist. Use these points to guide the placement of other features and ensure that they are proportionate to the overall figure. Pay attention to the proportions of individual features, such as the size of the eyes relative to the face or the length of the arms in relation to the torso. Adjust the proportions as needed to achieve a more accurate and visually appealing representation of samurai. 3. Light sketching and adjustments. Begin by sketching lightly to allow for easy modifications and adjustments. Light lines are less permanent and can be easily erased or altered if needed. This approach allows for flexibility in making changes to the proportions and structure of the drawing. As you progress, continuously evaluate the accuracy of your sketch and make adjustments as needed. For instance, if the proportions of samurai's limbs appear off, modify the shapes and guidelines to correct the issue. Don't be afraid to erase and redraw sections of the sketch if necessary. The goal is to achieve a well-structured and proportionate figure before moving on to more detailed aspects of the drawing. 4. Composition techniques. Consider the composition of your drawing to create a visually engaging and balanced representation of samurai. Use compositional techniques such as the rule of thirds to position the character within the frame. This technique involves dividing the canvas into 9 equal parts with 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines, and placing the main elements along these lines or at their intersections. Think about the balance and movement within the sketch. For dynamic poses, ensure that the weight distribution and lines of action are well defined. For example, if samurai is in an action pose, emphasize the movement and energy by incorporating strong lines of action and dynamic angles. Pay attention to the negative space around the character. The empty space surrounding samurai can impact the overall composition and visual impact of the drawing. Ensure that the negative space complements the figure and enhances the overall composition. Line quality and pressure. 1. Understanding line pressure. Line pressure refers to the amount of force applied to the drawing tool, which affects the thickness and darkness of the lines. Different stages of the drawing process require varying line pressures. Light lines. Use light lines for preliminary sketches to establish the basic structure and proportions. Light lines are less obtrusive and allow for easy adjustments and modifications. They help in building the framework of the drawing without committing to permanent marks. Dark lines. As you refine the sketch, use darker and more defined lines to emphasize important features and details. Dark lines help in defining the final contours and adding depth to the drawing. They also enhance the clarity of the drawing and make it more visually appealing. 2. Creating smooth and confident lines. Practice drawing smooth and confident lines to improve control and accuracy. Smooth lines contribute to a polished and professional appearance in your drawing. Avoid jittery or shaky lines by drawing slowly and deliberately, focusing on maintaining a steady hand. Use a consistent line weight to create a unified look. Thicker lines can be used for outer contours and important features, while thinner lines can define subtle details. This variation in line weight adds depth and dimension to the drawing. Experiment with different types of lines, such as straight lines, curves, and dashed lines, to add variety and texture to your drawing. Each type of line can convey different effects and contribute to the overall style of the drawing. 3. Techniques for better line quality. Line variation. Vary the thickness of your lines to create emphasis and contrast. For example, use thicker lines to outline the main contours of Samurai's figure and thinner lines for internal details such as facial features and clothing patterns. This variation adds visual interest and helps in distinguishing different elements of the drawing. Pressure control. Practice adjusting the pressure on your drawing tool to achieve different line qualities. Light pressure produces thin lines, while heavier pressure creates thicker lines. Mastering pressure control allows for greater flexibility and precision in your drawing. Line weight gradation. Incorporate line weight gradation to create a sense of depth and volume. Gradually transition from thicker lines to thinner lines to indicate light and shadow. This technique enhances the realism and dimensionality of your drawing. 4. Practice exercises. Engage in exercises that focus on line control and pressure variation. Practice drawing straight lines, curves, and shapes with different pressures to develop your skill and control. These exercises will help you achieve smoother and more consistent lines in your drawings. Experiment with different types of lines and pressures in various drawing scenarios. For example, draw simple. Sketching techniques and strategies for drawing samurai. 1. Gesture drawing. Gesture drawing is the art of capturing the essential movement and energy of a subject. It's especially important when drawing a dynamic character like Samurai, who embodies a range of actions and expressions. Gesture drawing is less about precision and more about conveying the fluidity and dynamism of the pose. Capturing movement and energy. Gesture drawing focuses on the overall motion and energy of the subject rather than specific details. When sketching Samurai, observe her pose, how her body moves, and the direction of her action. For example, if Samurai is depicted in an action pose, emphasize the movement of her limbs and torso. The goal is to capture the essence of her dynamic presence rather than a static representation. To achieve this, start with light, sweeping lines that reflect the primary movement. If Samurai is in a running stance, for instance, draw curved lines that illustrate the direction of her run and the positioning of her arms and legs. This approach will convey a sense of motion and energy, making your sketch more lively and engaging. Using quick, fluid strokes. Quick, fluid strokes are crucial for effective gesture drawing. These strokes should flow naturally and mirror the movement you're trying to capture. Avoid rigid or overly detailed lines at this stage. Instead, let your hand move freely to reflect the subject's dynamic nature. Practice drawing Samurai in various poses with rapid, fluid motions. This exercise helps you become more comfortable with capturing movement and ensures that your sketches retain a sense of life and spontaneity. Try to complete each gesture drawing within a limited time frame, such as 30 seconds to 2 minutes, to improve your ability to quickly capture essential details. Emphasizing fluidity. The fluidity of your lines is key to effective gesture drawing. For Samurai, Focus on how her body flows from one position to another. Observe how her clothing and hair move with her body and include these elements in your sketch to enhance the sense of motion. Additionally, practicing gesture drawing with different types of poses and actions will help you understand how various movements affect the character's body. This understanding will allow you to depict samurai in a way that feels natural and dynamic. 2. Constructive sketching. Constructive sketching involves building a drawing using basic geometric shapes and forms. This method provides a structural foundation for your artwork, helping you maintain accurate proportions and perspective. Starting with basic shapes. Begin by breaking down samurai's figure into fundamental shapes such as circles, ovals, rectangles, and cylinders. For example, use circles to represent the head and joints, rectangles or ovals for the torso and limbs, and cylinders for arms and legs. These shapes help you establish the basic proportions and structure of samurai's body. The use of basic shapes simplifies the complex form of the character, making it easier to manage proportions and perspective. Once these shapes are in place, you can refine them to build a more detailed representation of samurai. Establishing structure and perspective. Constructive sketching is particularly useful for maintaining correct proportions and perspective. By using geometric shapes as a guide, you can ensure that samurai's figure is proportionate and aligned correctly. This is especially important when drawing her in different poses or angles. For instance, if samurai is depicted in a three-quarter view, the geometric shapes will help you maintain the correct perspective of her body parts. Adjust the shapes as needed to fit the desired perspective and pose, making sure that the proportions remain consistent throughout the sketch. Refining details. After establishing the basic shapes, gradually refine them into more detailed outlines. Smooth out the transitions between shapes and add features such as clothing details, facial expressions, and accessories. This process builds on the structural framework you've created and adds depth to your drawing. As you refine the details, pay attention to how they interact with the underlying shapes. For example, if samurai's clothing drapes over her body, ensure that the folds and creases follow the contours of the underlying shapes. This approach will help maintain a cohesive and realistic depiction of the character. Practicing proportions. Understanding proportions is essential for drawing characters accurately. Study the relative sizes of different body parts, such as the head compared to the torso and limbs. Practice sketching samurai in various poses to improve your ability to maintain accurate proportions and achieve a balanced and realistic representation. 3. Blocking in. Blocking in is a technique used to establish the major areas and forms of the subject before adding finer details. This method helps you set up the overall composition and layout of your drawing. Using large, broad strokes. Start by using broad, loose strokes to outline the major forms and areas of samurai's figure. This includes the general shape of her body, the placement of limbs, and any significant elements in the composition. The goal is to create a rough framework that captures the overall layout without getting bogged down by intricate details. For samurai, use these broad strokes to define her silhouette and major features. This approach allows you to establish the composition and make adjustments before committing to finer details. Pay attention to how the different parts of her body relate to each other and to the overall layout of the drawing. Establishing composition and layout. Blocking in is crucial for setting up the composition of your drawing. Consider how samurai's figure fits within the drawing space and how she interacts with any background elements. Adjust the positioning and size of different parts as needed to achieve a balanced and harmonious composition. Use guidelines to help with composition and layout. For example, draw light lines to mark the centerline of samurai's body or to indicate the horizon line if she is interacting with the environment. These guidelines assist in maintaining proportional accuracy and ensuring that the composition is well organized. Gradual refinement. Once the major areas are blocked in, gradually refine the details. This involves adding more precise lines, textures, and features to the initial broad strokes. Blocking in serves as a foundation, allowing you to build up the drawing layer by layer. As you refine the details, refer back to the broader strokes to ensure that the proportions and composition remain consistent. This approach helps you maintain the integrity of the initial framework while adding depth and complexity to the drawing. Using guidelines and reference points. Guidelines and reference points can be useful during the blocking in phase. Draw light lines to mark key points of reference, such as the position of Samurai's limbs or the alignment of her features. These guidelines help you maintain accuracy and ensure that the various elements of the drawing are correctly positioned. Additionally, use reference images or poses of Samurai to guide your blocking in process. These references provide a visual aid that helps you accurately capture her appearance and pose. Conclusion: mastering sketching techniques such as gesture drawing, constructive sketching, and blocking in is essential for creating accurate and dynamic drawings of characters like Samurai. Gesture drawing captures the movement and energy of the character, constructive sketching establishes structure and perspective, and blocking in sets up the overall composition. By integrating these techniques into your drawing practice, you can enhance the quality and impact of your sketches, leading to more engaging and well-structured final artworks. As you continue to practice and refine these techniques, you'll develop a deeper understanding of how to represent dynamic poses, maintain proportional accuracy, and create compelling compositions. With dedication and perseverance, you'll be well on your way to mastering the art of sketching and achieving a captivating depiction of Samurai. Working with reference materials. Introduction. Working with reference materials is an essential skill for any artist. Whether you're drawing a character from an anime, a real-life scene, or a completely imaginary concept, references provide the foundation needed to create accurate and compelling artwork. This guide will explore how to effectively use photographs and images as references and how to build and utilize a reference library to enhance your drawing skills. Using photographs and images. 1. Collecting reference images. Diverse angles and views. To capture a subject accurately, it's crucial to gather reference images from various angles. For example, if you're drawing Samurai, collect images showing her from the front, side, and back. This helps in understanding the full 3D form of the character, including how her features and clothing wrap around her body. Detail-oriented images. Look for images that highlight different details of the subject. This includes close-ups of specific features like facial expressions, clothing textures, and any unique attributes. For anime characters, this might involve focusing on intricate details like hair strands or clothing patterns. Contextual images. Sometimes, it's useful to have images that show the subject in different contexts. For Samurai, this might mean images that include her in different poses or interacting with environment. This helps in understanding how she might look in various situations, which can be useful for dynamic poses or background integration. 2. Analyzing reference images. Understanding proportions. Study the proportions of the subject by comparing reference images. This involves looking at the relationship between different parts of the body or subject. For anime characters, proportions can be exaggerated, so understanding the artist's style and how it deviates from real-life proportions is crucial. Texture and detail analysis. Pay attention to the textures and fine details in the reference images. For Samurai, observe how light interacts with her clothing and skin. Notice the texture of her hair and the subtle variations in color and shading. Decomposing the subject. Break down the subject into basic shapes and forms as seen in the reference images. This simplification helps in capturing the overall structure before adding intricate details. This method is particularly useful when trying to replicate complex designs or unique features. Creating a reference library. 1. Building your library. Organizing references by subject. Create categories for your reference materials. You might have separate folders for different subjects, such as characters, environments, poses, and textures. For instance, a section dedicated to Samurai could include various poses, expressions, and costume details. including various styles. Diversify your library by including references from different styles and sources. This might mean adding references from other anime characters, artists' sketches, or even real-life photographs. This variety helps in adapting and blending different elements into your artwork. Digital and physical references. Depending on your preference, maintain both digital and physical reference materials. Digital references can be easily organized and accessed using tools like image galleries or art software, while physical references might include printed images, sketches, or books. 2. Using references for inspiration and guidance. Inspiration for creativity. Use your reference library as a source of inspiration. Look through different images to spark ideas for new compositions, poses, or styles. For samurai, you might find inspiration from other futuristic characters or settings that influence her design. Guidance for accuracy. During the drawing process, refer back to your collected images to ensure accuracy. This helps in maintaining consistency in details and proportions. For complex parts, such as samurai's cybernetic enhancements, use detailed images to guide your rendering. Creating mood and atmosphere. References can also help in setting the mood and atmosphere of your artwork. Analyze images that convey the desired feeling or tone, and use similar techniques to achieve this in your drawing of samurai. 3. Updating and expanding your library. Regular updates. Continuously update your reference library with new materials. As your skills develop and your projects evolve, new references might become necessary. Regular updates ensure that your library remains relevant and useful. Expanding scope. Expand your reference library to include new subjects or styles that you want to explore. For example, if you decide to experiment with different genres or character designs, adding references related to these new interests can enhance your creative versatility. Conclusion. Mastering the use of reference materials is a key component in developing your drawing skills. By collecting diverse and detailed images, analyzing them thoroughly, and maintaining a well-organized reference library, you can create more accurate and engaging artwork. Whether you're drawing a character like samurai or exploring new artistic concepts, effective use of references will elevate the quality and depth of your creations. Common mistakes and how to avoid them. Drawing is a skill that requires practice and patience, especially when it comes to capturing complex characters like samurai. Understanding common mistakes and knowing how to avoid them can make a significant difference in the quality of your sketch. Here's an in-depth look at some typical pitfalls and how to steer clear of them. 1. Over-reliance on details. Description. One common mistake artists make is getting too caught up in intricate details too early in the sketching process. While details are essential for bringing a character to life, focusing on them too soon can hinder the overall progress of your drawing. Why it's a problem. Inhibits progress. Concentrating on minute details early on can prevent you from seeing the bigger picture, which can result in an imbalanced or inaccurate sketch. Potential revisions. If the basic structure is flawed, adding details will only highlight these flaws and make them more challenging to correct. How to avoid it. Start with basic shapes. Begin by sketching the basic shapes and forms that make up samurai's body and clothing. Use simple geometric shapes like circles, ovals, and rectangles to outline her posture and proportions. Focus on structure first. Concentrate on capturing the overall structure and composition of the character before diving into details. Ensure that the pose and proportions are correct, as this forms the foundation for adding details later. Iterative refinement. Gradually refine the sketch in stages. Start with broad strokes to establish the main features and progressively add finer details as the structure becomes more defined. 2. Neglecting proportions and perspective. Description. Accurate proportions and perspective are crucial for creating a believable and dynamic drawing. Neglecting these elements can lead to a sketch that looks distorted or unrealistic. Why it's a problem. Distortion. Incorrect proportions and perspective can make parts of the drawing look unnatural, which can detract from the overall appeal. Imbalance. Proper proportions and perspective are essential for maintaining balance and realism in your drawing. How to avoid it? Use guidelines. Employ guidelines and reference lines to maintain proportion and perspective. This might include drawing a central axis or using grid lines to keep elements aligned. Measure frequently. Use measuring techniques such as comparing the sizes of different parts of the drawing relative to each other. For example, measure the length of Samurai's head in relation to her body to ensure correct proportions. Check angles. Pay attention to the angles and foreshortening in the drawing. Regularly compare these aspects to your references to ensure that the perspective remains accurate. 3. Using excessive pressure. Description. Applying too much pressure with your pencil can make it challenging to erase or modify the sketch later. This mistake is often made by beginners who are eager to make their lines darker and more defined. Why it's a problem. Difficulty in adjustments. Heavy lines can be difficult to erase or alter, making it harder to correct mistakes or refine the sketch. Loss of flexibility. Using excessive pressure can reduce the flexibility of your sketching process, making it more challenging to make changes as the drawing progresses. How to avoid it. Light touch. Start with light lines and gradually build up the pressure as needed. This allows for easier modifications and corrections. Layered approach. Use multiple layers of light lines to gradually increase the darkness of your sketch. This technique helps in maintaining a clean and adjustable sketch. Use the right pencil. Select a pencil with a softer lead, e.g., 2H or H, for initial sketches, as these produce lighter lines that are easier to modify. Reserve harder pencils, e.g., HB or B, for darker, more defined lines. Refining your rough sketch. Introduction to refining your rough sketch. Understanding the importance. Refining your rough sketch is a critical stage in the drawing process. It transforms a basic framework into a more detailed and accurate representation of your subject. This step is where your sketch begins to take on a life of its own, becoming more refined and closer to the final artwork you envision. 2. Reviewing and adjusting. Step back and assess. Importance of distance. Stepping back from your sketch, both physically and mentally, allows you to view your work with fresh eyes. This distance helps you see the overall composition, proportions, and any inconsistencies that might not be apparent up close. Techniques for effective reviewing. Try squinting at your sketch to reduce detail and focus on the overall shapes and proportions. You can also use a mirror to view your drawing in reverse. This can reveal mistakes that were not obvious in the original orientation. Utilizing tools. Use tools like a grid or a reference image to compare proportions. Some artists use a digital tool to overlay a grid or adjust the opacity of their sketch for easier comparison. Identifying and correcting proportions. Analyzing proportions. Look for any disproportionate areas. For example, if you're drawing Samurai, ensure that her limbs, facial features, and other elements are in proportion to each other. Making adjustments. Use light, non-permanent lines to correct any mistakes. It's easier to adjust proportions and correct errors with light pencil strokes than with heavy, dark lines. Techniques for precision. Use comparative measurement techniques, such as measuring with your pencil, to compare different parts of your sketch. This method helps ensure that proportions are accurate. Composition review. Assessing overall layout. Check if the elements of your sketch are well balanced within the composition. Consider the placement of major features and their relationship to the overall design. Adjusting composition. If the composition feels off balance, make adjustments by moving elements or changing their sizes. Use guidelines or a grid to assist in repositioning elements accurately. Making adjustments and corrections. Refining lines. Once you've identified areas for correction, refine your lines to enhance clarity. Clean up unnecessary or stray lines while maintaining the integrity of your sketch. Continuous review. Keep reviewing and adjusting as you refine your sketch. It's an iterative process where constant assessment and correction lead to a more polished final piece. 3. Adding preliminary details. Starting with basic details. Importance of preliminary details. Adding preliminary details helps flesh out the features of your sketch, giving it more depth and character. It's essential for building a foundation for more intricate detailing later. Techniques for adding details. Begin with basic shapes and forms, then gradually add more complex features. For instance, start with simple shapes for samurai's clothing and accessories before adding intricate patterns or textures. Developing key areas. Focusing on focal points. Identify the focal points of your drawing, such as samurai's face or key elements of her outfit. Focus on developing these areas first, as they will be the most prominent in the final artwork. Adding texture and depth. Introduce basic textures and shading to these key areas. This helps in understanding how different elements interact with light and shadow, which is crucial for realistic rendering. Maintaining consistency. Ensure that the details you add are consistent with the style and direction of your sketch. This includes maintaining proportional accuracy and stylistic elements that align with your vision for the drawing. Developing the environment. Background elements. If your sketch includes background elements, start by adding basic details to these areas. This helps integrate the character with their environment and provides context. Harmonizing with the foreground. Ensure that background details do not overpower the main subject. They should complement and enhance the focal points without distracting from them. Preparing for final refinements. Planning next steps. Once preliminary details are added, plan how you will proceed with further refinement. Decide which areas need more attention and which details require enhancement. Refining your approach. Consider how you will approach the final stages of your drawing, including finalizing details, inking, or adding color. Your preliminary details will guide these decisions. IV. Conclusion. Reflecting on progress. After refining your rough sketch and adding preliminary details, reflect on the progress you've made. This stage is crucial for preparing your sketch for the final phases of the drawing process. Continuous improvement. Remember that refining a sketch is an ongoing process. Continue to assess and adjust as needed to achieve the best possible outcome for your final artwork. Practice exercises. Introduction to practice exercises. Purpose and benefits. Practice exercises are essential for developing fundamental drawing skills and enhancing artistic proficiency. They provide opportunities to experiment with various techniques, refine skills, and build confidence. These exercises are crucial for mastering the nuances of drawing, from capturing dynamic poses to understanding proportions and styles. 2. Quick sketches. Overview and importance. Definition and goals. Quick sketches, also known as gesture drawings, are brief, spontaneous sketches that capture the basic form and movement of a subject. They are intended to improve your ability to render subjects quickly and accurately while focusing on essential elements like form and motion. Benefits. Quick sketches help in developing observational skills, improving hand-eye coordination, and enhancing your ability to depict movement and expression in a limited time frame. Setting up quick sketch exercises. Timer technique. Set a timer for 1 to 5 minutes for each sketch. The short duration encourages you to focus on capturing the essence of the subject without getting bogged down in details. Begin with shorter intervals and gradually increase the time as you become more comfortable. Subject variety. Choose a diverse range of subjects for your quick sketches, including people, animals, objects, and environments. This variety helps you practice different forms and perspectives, enhancing your overall drawing skills. Experimenting with styles and techniques. Exploring different styles. Use quick sketches to experiment with various artistic styles, such as realism, abstraction, or impressionism. This exploration helps you understand how different styles affect the depiction of form and movement. Technique variation. Experiment with different techniques, such as cross-hatching, stippling, or contour lines, to see how they influence the effectiveness of your sketches. Practice using different drawing tools like pencils, pens, or charcoal to explore their effects. Practical tips for quick sketching. Focus on movement. Prioritize capturing the movement and flow of the subject rather than perfecting details. Concentrate on the basic shapes and lines that define the subject's form and motion. Embrace imperfection. Allow yourself to make mistakes and embrace the spontaneous nature of quick sketches. These sketches are not about perfection but about capturing the essence and practicing fluidity in your drawing. 3. Proportion studies. Overview and importance. Understanding proportions. Proportion studies involve practicing the accurate representation of the size and relationship between different parts of a subject. Mastery of proportions is crucial for creating realistic and well-balanced drawings. Benefits. Studying proportions helps improve accuracy in your drawings, enhances your ability to capture the subject's likeness, and ensures that all elements of the drawing are in harmony. Using proportional grids and guidelines. Proportional grids. Use proportional grids to break down a subject into smaller, manageable sections. Draw a grid over your reference image and replicate the grid on your drawing paper to help maintain accurate proportions. Guidelines. Create guidelines on your sketch to help align and position different parts of the subject accurately. Guidelines can be used to measure and compare proportions, ensuring that each element is correctly sized and positioned. Comparing sketches with reference images. Reference comparison. Regularly compare your sketches with reference images to assess accuracy. Look for discrepancies in proportions and make adjustments as needed. This comparison helps in identifying and correcting proportional errors. Adjusting proportions. If you notice any proportional inaccuracies, use light lines to correct them. Continuously adjust and refine your sketch to achieve accurate proportions. Practical tips for proportion studies. Start with basic shapes. Begin your proportion studies by breaking down complex subjects into basic shapes. This approach simplifies the drawing process and makes it easier to achieve accurate proportions. Practice regularly. Consistent practice is key to improving your proportion skills. Set aside time for regular proportion studies to build your proficiency and confidence in rendering accurate proportions. IV. Gesture and action drawing. Overview and importance. Definition and goals. Gesture and action drawing focuses on capturing the dynamic movement and energy of a subject. These drawings aim to convey the essence of the subject's pose and motion rather than precise details. Benefits. Practicing. Gesture and action drawing helps improve your ability to depict movement, understand anatomical structure, and convey a sense of energy and vitality in your drawings. Practicing gesture drawing. Dynamic poses. Choose dynamic poses that highlight the subject's movement and action. Practice sketching these poses quickly to capture the flow and energy of the motion. Focus on line quality. Use fluid, expressive lines to convey the movement and rhythm of the pose. Avoid getting bogged down in details. Instead, focus on capturing the overall gesture and dynamic quality of the subject. Capturing the essence of movement. Emphasizing key lines. Identify and emphasize the key lines that define the movement and structure of the subject. Focus on the lines that show the direction and flow of the pose. Expressive techniques. Experiment with different techniques to express movement, such as varying line thickness or using gestural strokes. These techniques help convey the energy and vitality of the subject. Practical tips for gesture and action drawing. Warm-up exercises. Start with warm-up exercises to loosen up and get into the flow of drawing. Quick, loose sketches can help prepare you for more focused gesture and action drawing. Analyze and learn. After completing gesture drawings, analyze them to understand how well you captured the movement and essence of the pose. Learn from any mistakes and apply these insights to future drawings. V. Conclusion. Reflecting on practice exercises. Reflect on the progress you've made through these practice exercises. Assess how each exercise has contributed to your overall skill development and artistic growth. Continuous improvement. Practice is an ongoing process. Continue to incorporate these exercises into your routine to continually refine your skills and enhance your artistic abilities. Consistency and practice. Regular practice. One of the most important aspects of developing your sketching skills is consistency. Just like any other skill, drawing improves with regular practice. Set aside dedicated time each day or week specifically for sketching. This doesn't mean you have to produce a finished piece every time you draw. Even brief, focused sketching sessions can yield significant improvements over time. Creating a routine. Developing a routine helps establish a habit. Consider setting a specific time of day that works best for you, whether it's in the morning before work, during your lunch break, or in the evening. Consistency is more important than the length of time spent drawing. Even a short, daily session can be more beneficial than sporadic, lengthy sessions. Experimentation. Use your practice time to experiment with different techniques and styles. Don't be afraid to try new things, even if they seem outside your comfort zone. Experimenting with various approaches can lead to unexpected discoveries and help you find what works best for you. For instance, you might explore different line weights, shading techniques, or proportions. Documenting progress. Keeping a sketchbook is an invaluable tool for tracking your progress. A sketchbook allows you to see how your skills have evolved over time. Regularly review your older sketches to observe improvements and identify areas where you may need to focus more attention. Additionally, it can be motivating to see how much you have accomplished. Reflecting on development. Take time to reflect on your progress periodically. This reflection can help you understand your growth and pinpoint specific skills or techniques that need more work. Reflecting on your development also helps you set new goals and stay motivated. Embracing mistakes. Acceptance of imperfection. One of the most crucial aspects of creating rough sketches is accepting that they will not always be perfect. Rough sketches are a preliminary stage in the creative process and are inherently imperfect. The purpose of a rough sketch is to explore ideas, establish compositions, and refine concepts, not to produce a final product. Learning from mistakes. Instead of viewing mistakes as setbacks, see them as opportunities for growth. Analyze what went wrong and why, and use that insight to make improvements in future sketches. Mistakes are valuable learning experiences that can guide you toward better techniques and outcomes. Iterative process. Understanding that sketching is an iterative process can help you embrace mistakes. Rough sketches are meant to be revised and refined. As you work through multiple iterations, you'll gradually enhance your drawing. This iterative approach not only improves your skills but also helps you develop a more nuanced understanding of your subjects. Maintaining a positive attitude. Maintain a positive attitude toward your sketches, even when they don't turn out as expected. Acknowledging that rough sketches are a necessary part of the creative process can alleviate frustration. Focus on the progress you're making rather than the imperfections. Encouraging self-compassion. Be kind to yourself and recognize that every artist faces challenges and produces imperfect work. Self-compassion is essential for maintaining motivation and enjoying the creative process. Remind yourself that every sketch is a step toward improvement. Final thoughts. Mastering rough sketching requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to embrace imperfection. By dedicating time to regular practice and viewing mistakes as learning opportunities, you'll steadily improve your skills. Keep a sketchbook to document your journey and reflect on your progress. Embrace the iterative nature of sketching, and remember that every rough sketch brings you closer to your artistic goals. Continue to explore, experiment, and enjoy the process of drawing. The more you practice and learn from your experiences, the more proficient and confident you'll become in your sketching abilities. Next, we'll dive into the basics of shading and detailing. Introduction to shading. Purpose and importance of shading. Shading is a crucial aspect of drawing that brings your artwork to life by adding depth, dimension, and realism. Its primary purpose is to simulate how light interacts with the surfaces of objects, creating the illusion of three-dimensional form on a two-dimensional plane. Understanding and applying shading techniques effectively can transform a flat sketch into a dynamic and engaging piece of art. 1. Enhancing depth and dimension. Shading helps to convey the three-dimensional form of objects and characters. By depicting how light falls on different surfaces, shading creates a sense of depth and volume. For instance, shadows can make it clear whether an object is protruding or recessed, enhancing the overall realism of your drawing. This is especially important in character design, where accurate shading can highlight features like muscles, folds in clothing, and facial expressions. 2. Creating realistic textures. Different textures are represented through shading. Whether it's the smoothness of skin, the roughness of fabric, or the metallic sheen of an object, shading helps to illustrate these textures realistically. Understanding how light interacts with various surfaces enables you to render different materials convincingly, adding richness to your artwork. 3. Establishing mood and atmosphere. The way you use shading can significantly influence the mood of your drawing. Dark, heavy shading can create a dramatic or somber atmosphere, while lighter shading can produce a more uplifting or serene feel. By controlling the intensity and direction of shadows, you can set the emotional tone of your artwork and guide the viewer's perception. 4. Focusing attention. Shading can be used to draw attention to specific areas of your drawing. By strategically placing highlights and shadows, you can guide the viewer's eye to important features or focal points. This technique is particularly useful in character design, where you might want to emphasize certain aspects of the character's face or outfit. Overview of different shading techniques. There are several shading techniques that artists use to create different effects and textures in their drawings. Each technique offers unique advantages and can be used to achieve specific artistic goals. Understanding these techniques will help you choose the right approach for your drawing of samurai. Here's an overview of some common shading methods. 1. Hatching. Hatching involves drawing a series of parallel lines to create areas of shadow. The density and direction of the lines can be adjusted to represent varying degrees of darkness and texture. Cross-hatching, where lines intersect, can be used to create deeper shadows and more complex textures. This technique is effective for creating linear texture and can be adapted for various styles. 2. Stippling. Stippling uses dots to create shading and texture. The density and arrangement of the dots determine the darkness of the shaded area. Stippling can create a soft, textured look and is useful for rendering subtle gradations of light and shadow. It's a time-consuming method but can produce intricate and detailed results. 3. Blending. Blending involves smoothing out pencil strokes to create a gradient of tones. This technique can be achieved with blending stumps, fingers, or even tissue. Blending is ideal for achieving smooth transitions between light and shadow, making it suitable for rendering realistic skin textures and soft, gradual shadows. 4. Scumbling. Scumbling is a technique where you use a loose, circular motion to apply pencil marks. This creates a texture that can be used to represent rough surfaces or to blend areas of shading. Scumbling is particularly useful for adding texture to fabric or creating organic, natural textures in your drawing. 5. Smudging. Smudging involves using a tool or your finger to blur pencil marks, creating a soft, smooth effect. This technique can be used to create subtle gradients and to soften harsh lines. Smudging is effective for blending shadows and achieving a more fluid, cohesive shading effect. 6. Gradation. Gradation refers to the smooth transition between light and dark areas. This technique is often achieved through blending and is important for creating realistic representations of light and shadow. Gradations can help to define the contours of your subject and create a sense of volume. 7. Chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is an Italian term meaning light-dark, and refers to the use of strong contrasts between light and dark areas to create a dramatic effect. This technique is effective for emphasizing the three-dimensionality of your subject and can be used to create a striking visual impact. 8. Coarse shadow and cast shadow. Understanding coarse shadows, the darkest part of the shadow on an object, and cast shadows, the shadow cast by an object onto another surface, is essential for creating realistic shading. Coarse shadows help define the form of the object, while cast shadows add to the overall depth and realism of the drawing. By mastering these shading techniques, you will be able to create more dynamic and lifelike drawings of characters like samurai. Practice and experimentation with these methods will allow you to develop your own style and approach to shading, enhancing the overall quality of your artwork. Basic shading techniques. Hatching. Single and cross hatching. Hatching is a fundamental shading technique where lines are drawn in parallel to build up areas of shadow. This method can vary in density, direction, and spacing to create different effects. Understanding hatching is crucial for rendering various textures and forms in your artwork. 1. Single hatching. Single hatching involves drawing parallel lines in a consistent direction. The closeness and number of lines determine the darkness of the shaded area. For lighter shadows, you can space the lines farther apart, while closer lines will create a darker, more intense shadow. Application. Use single hatching to depict simple, uniform textures and to add depth to flat surfaces. It's useful for creating preliminary shadows and defining basic forms. Experiment with line direction and spacing to see how it affects the shading and texture. Tips. Maintain consistent line pressure for even shading, and use a ruler for straight, uniform lines if needed. For a smoother effect, keep the lines parallel and avoid abrupt changes in line direction. 2. Cross-hatching. Cross-hatching builds upon single hatching by adding a second layer of lines intersecting the first layer. This technique creates more complex textures and deeper shadows by varying the angle and density of the intersecting lines. Application. Use cross-hatching to add depth and dimension to areas where light and shadow interact more intricately. It's effective for creating rich textures and detailed shading in complex forms, such as folds in clothing or detailed facial features. Tips. Vary the angle of the intersecting lines to achieve different effects. Lighter cross-hatching will result in subtle shading, while more intense cross-hatching can create strong contrasts. Practice layering lines to find the right balance for your desired effect. Stippling. Dot placement and density. Stippling involves using dots to create areas of shading. The density and arrangement of the dots dictate the overall darkness and texture of the shaded region. This technique can be particularly effective for creating intricate details and smooth gradients. 1. Dot placement. The placement of dots in stippling is essential for controlling the shading. Dots should be evenly distributed where light is less intense and more concentrated in areas requiring darker shading. Application. Use stippling to achieve a soft, textured look in areas like skin or fabric. It's useful for detailed and delicate shading where a smooth gradient is desired, such as in the subtle shadows on samurai's face or clothing. Tips. Control dot density by adjusting your pen or pencil pressure. For a smoother gradient, gradually increase the dot density from light to dark areas. Be patient, as stippling can be time-consuming but rewarding for detailed work. 2. Density. The density of the dots affects the shading's depth. Sparse dots create light shading, while dense dots produce darker, more intense areas. Application. Vary dot density to create gradations and textures. For example, a densely stippled area might represent a shadowed section of samurai's outfit, while a lighter stippling could indicate a highlight or lighter area. Tips. Avoid overloading areas with dots, as this can create a cluttered look. Practice varying dot sizes and spacing to see how they affect the shading and texture. Blending. Smooth transitions and tools. Blending involves smoothing out pencil strokes to create seamless transitions between light and dark areas. This technique helps to achieve a more natural and realistic look in your shading. 1. Smooth transitions. Blending is used to transition smoothly between different tones, eliminating harsh lines and creating a gradient effect. It is ideal for rendering smooth surfaces and subtle shading. Application. Use blending to create soft shadows and transitions on samurai's skin or clothing. This technique helps in achieving a realistic representation of light and shadow by making the shading appear more cohesive. Tips. Start blending from the lighter areas and work toward the darker areas. Use a gentle hand to avoid smudging or creating uneven patches. Practice controlling the pressure and direction of your blending to achieve the desired effect. 2. Tools for blending. Several tools can be used for blending, including blending stumps, fingers, and tissues. Blending stumps. These are cylindrical tools made of compressed paper or felt that help in smoothing out pencil marks. They are useful for creating detailed and controlled blending. Fingers. Using your fingers can create a softer, more organic blend. However, be cautious of smudging or transferring oils from your skin to the paper. Tissues. Tissues or soft cloths can be used to blend larger areas or achieve a smooth, even texture. They are particularly useful for blending large expanses of shading. Tips. Clean blending tools regularly to avoid transferring graphite from one area to another. Experiment with different tools to find the one that works best for your style and the effect you want to achieve. By mastering these basic shading techniques, hatching, stippling, and blending, you'll be able to create detailed and dynamic drawings of samurai from. Each technique offers unique possibilities for rendering textures and shadows, enhancing the overall quality and realism of your artwork. Understanding light sources. Types of light sources. Understanding different types of light sources is essential for accurately depicting light and shadow in your drawings. Each type of light source affects how light interacts with objects, creating distinct shadows and highlights. Here's a breakdown of the main types of light sources. 1. Directional light. Directional light comes from a single, identifiable source, such as the sun or a spotlight. It casts shadows that are well defined and follow the direction of the light. This type of light creates strong contrasts between light and dark areas. Application. Use directional light to create dramatic shadows and highlights. For instance, if you're drawing samurai in a scene with strong sunlight, you'll need to consider how the sunlight casts long, sharp shadows and creates bright highlights on her features. Tips. Pay attention to the angle and position of the light source relative to your subject. This will help you place shadows and highlights accurately. Directional light is useful for emphasizing form and creating a bold visual impact. 2. Ambient light. Ambient light is diffused and comes from multiple sources, creating soft, even illumination with minimal shadows. It's the light that fills in the gaps where direct light doesn't reach, often found in overcast conditions or indoor settings with indirect light. Application. Ambient light is useful for rendering a more subtle and even lighting effect. When drawing samurai in a dimly lit environment or indoors, ambient light will ensure that shadows are softer and highlights are less intense. Tips. Use ambient light to soften shadows and reduce the contrast between light and dark areas. This can help in creating a more natural and uniform look, especially in scenes with diffused or indirect lighting. 3. Point light. Point light sources emit light in all directions from a single point, such as a lamp or candle. This type of light creates sharp, focused shadows that spread out from the source, with a pronounced fall-off as distance from the light increases. Application. Point light is ideal for creating dramatic, localized effects. When drawing a scene with a single light source, like a street lamp or a spotlight, use point light to render focused illumination and sharp, defined shadows. Tips. Consider how the intensity and distance of the point light affect the shadows. Shadows will be darkest closest to the light source and gradually fade out. Use this effect to add depth and focus to specific areas in your drawing. 4. Spotlight. Spotlight is similar to directional light but with a focused beam, creating a conical shape of light. It's used to highlight specific areas while leaving others in shadow, often seen in theatrical or stage lighting. Application. Use spotlight to draw attention to certain features or areas of your subject. This can be useful for emphasizing parts of samurai's outfit or face, creating a spotlight effect that draws the viewer's eye to a particular area. Tips. Pay attention to the fall-off of light intensity from the center to the edges of the spot. This gradient effect will help in achieving a natural and realistic lighting effect in your drawing. How light affects form and shadow. Understanding how light affects form and shadow is essential for creating realistic and dynamic drawings. The interaction between light and form determines how shadows are cast and how highlights appear. 1. Light and form. Light creates the illusion of three-dimensionality by defining the contours and surfaces of objects. The direction of the light source affects how highlights and shadows are distributed across the form. Application. Observe how light interacts with different surfaces. For example, a round object like Samurai's head will have a gradual transition from light to shadow, while a flat surface will have more distinct boundaries between light and dark areas. Tips. Use reference images or observe real-life objects under various lighting conditions to understand how light shapes the form. Practice drawing different forms with varying light sources to develop a keen sense of how light affects your subject. 2. Types of shadows. Shadows, created by light sources, can be categorized into several types. Cast shadows. These are the shadows that an object casts onto another surface. They are affected by the light source's position and intensity. Cast shadows can be sharp or soft, depending on the light source. Core shadows, the darkest part of the shadow on the object itself, where the light is blocked completely. Core shadows define the depth and volume of the object. Reflected light, light that bounces off surrounding surfaces and illuminates the shadowed areas, creating subtle highlights within shadows. Tips. Pay attention to the edges of shadows and their transitions. Soft shadows occur with diffuse light sources, while sharp shadows are typical of direct light sources. Practice rendering different types of shadows to understand their effects on your drawing. Creating a light source in your drawing. Incorporating a light source into your drawing helps in establishing a consistent lighting scheme and enhancing the overall realism of your artwork. 1. Determining the light source. Decide on the type and position of the light source before starting your drawing. This will guide your shading and shadow placement throughout the drawing process. Application. For Samurai From, choose a light source that complements the scene. Whether it's a dramatic, directional light or a subtle ambient light, ensure that it enhances the mood and complements the character's design. Tips. Clearly define the light source in your sketch or preliminary drawing. Use markers or annotations to indicate the direction and intensity of the light to keep your shading consistent. 2. Shading and highlights. Apply shading and highlights based on the light source you've chosen. Ensure that shadows and highlights align with the light source's direction and intensity. Application. Start with the lightest areas and build up to the darker shadows. Use your chosen light source to guide the placement of highlights and shadows on Samurai's features and clothing. Tips. Regularly step back and review your drawing to ensure that the light source is consistent throughout. Adjust shadows and highlights as needed to maintain realism and coherence. By understanding different types of light sources, how they affect form and shadow, and how to effectively create a light source in your drawing, you'll be able to produce more realistic and visually compelling artwork of Samurai From. Practice and observation will further enhance your ability to capture the nuances of light and shadow in your drawings. Creating depth and dimension. Creating depth and dimension in your artwork involves accurately depicting how light and shadow interact with forms. This not only enhances the realism of your drawing but also adds a sense of three-dimensionality. Here's how you can achieve depth and dimension through effective use of light and shadow. Light and shadow relationships. 1. Understanding light and shadow interaction. The relationship between light and shadow is fundamental to creating depth. Shadows occur where light is obstructed or redirected by the object, and they help to define the contours and volume of the subject. Application. Observe how light sources cast shadows on objects and how those shadows shape the form. For Samurai, consider how the light affects different parts of her body and clothing, such as how the shadows on her arms might differ from those on her face due to the varying angles of light. Tips. Use reference images to see how light interacts with different surfaces. Pay attention to the direction, intensity, and quality of light, and replicate these effects in your drawing to enhance depth. 2. Creating contrast. Contrast between light and shadow helps to define the form and create visual interest. Areas of strong light contrast with dark shadows can create dramatic effects, while softer contrasts provide a more subtle, natural look. Application. Use strong contrasts for dramatic scenes or to emphasize key features of samurai. Softer contrasts work well for more subtle, realistic effects, such as creating smooth transitions in her clothing or skin. Tips. Adjust the contrast by varying the intensity of your shading. Ensure that light and shadow are balanced to maintain a natural appearance, and avoid overusing high contrast unless it's intentional for the effect. Core shadows, cast shadows, and reflected light. 1. Core shadows. Core shadows are the darkest part of the shadow on the object itself, where light is completely blocked. They define the object's form and depth by illustrating how light is obstructed. Application. Apply core shadows to areas where the object curves away from the light source or where light is blocked entirely. For samurai, core shadows will help define the contours of her face, body, and clothing. Tips. Place core shadows where the object turns away from the light. Blend them gradually into lighter areas to create a natural transition from dark to light. 2. Cast shadows. Cast shadows are the shadows that an object projects onto other surfaces. They vary in shape and intensity depending on the light source's position and the object's form. Application. Use cast shadows to indicate the relationship between samurai and her environment. For instance, if she's standing, her cast shadow on the ground or nearby objects will help to place her in space and provide context. Tips. Observe how cast shadows stretch and change shape with different light angles. Ensure that the cast shadows correspond to the light source and the object's position. 3. Reflected light. Reflected light occurs when light bounces off nearby surfaces and illuminates the shadowed areas of an object. It adds subtle highlights within shadows and contributes to a more realistic look. Application. Add reflected light to shadowed areas of samurai's drawing to create depth and a more natural appearance. For example, if she's near a light-colored surface, the reflected light can soften the shadows and add detail. Tips. Use a lighter pencil or shading technique to add reflected light gently. Avoid making reflected light too strong. It should be subtle and complement the overall shading. Using gradients to add depth. 1. Creating gradients. Gradients are smooth transitions from light to dark that help to depict depth and volume. They are achieved through blending or shading techniques that create a gradual change in tone. Application. Apply gradients to areas where light transitions smoothly, such as the curvature of samurai's face or the folds of her clothing. Gradients help to illustrate the three-dimensional form and create a realistic effect. Tips. Practice blending techniques to achieve smooth gradients. Use a blending stump, tissue, or your fingers to ensure a seamless transition between light and dark areas. 2. Layering and building up tones. Gradients can be built up gradually by layering and adjusting the tone. Start with lighter tones and gradually add darker shades to create depth and dimension. Application. For a realistic gradient, start with light shading and progressively add more layers of darker tones. This method helps to create a natural and coherent depth effect in your drawing. Tips. Work in layers to control the gradient smoothly. Avoid harsh lines or abrupt changes in tone by blending thoroughly and adjusting your shading as needed. By understanding light and shadow relationships, and effectively using core shadows, cast shadows, reflected light, and gradients, you'll be able to create depth and dimension in your drawings of samurai from. These techniques will help you achieve a more realistic and visually engaging representation of your subject. Textural shading. Techniques for different textures. Shading different textures requires understanding how various surfaces interact with light. Here's how to approach shading for common textures such as skin, clothing, and hair. 1. Skin. Skin texture can range from smooth and even to rough and varied, depending on factors like lighting and the character's condition. Technique. Use soft, blended shading to depict smooth skin. Gradually build up layers to create subtle gradients, mimicking the natural transitions between light and shadow. For areas like wrinkles or pores, use finer lines and detailed shading to capture these features. Tips: avoid harsh lines or overuse of texture in areas where smoothness is needed. For more detailed work, lightly stipple or cross-hatch to indicate skin texture without making it look too rough. 2. Clothing. Clothing can have various textures such as fabric, leather, or metal. Each type requires a different shading approach to capture its unique surface characteristics. Technique. For fabric, use smooth, flowing lines and soft gradients to depict the way light falls over folds and creases. For leather, use a mix of smooth shading and subtle texture to convey its sheen and surface. For metal, highlight the reflective quality with sharper contrasts and smooth transitions. Tips: study the specific fabric or material you're drawing to understand how it interacts with light. Pay attention to details like highlights on folds or reflections on smooth surfaces. 3. Hair. Hair texture varies from smooth and shiny to coarse and voluminous. The shading technique should reflect the type of hair you're drawing. Technique: use long, flowing strokes or small, controlled lines to represent hair strands. Blend smoothly for shiny, straight hair and use more defined strokes for curly or textured hair. Layering shades helps to build volume and dimension. Tips: pay attention to light direction and how it affects hair highlights and shadows. For realistic hair, vary your shading to reflect light and create depth, making sure to capture the natural flow and volume of the hair. How to convey texture through shading. Conveying texture through shading involves using various techniques to mimic the appearance of different surfaces. Here's how to achieve this. 1. Understanding surface properties. Different surfaces reflect light differently. Smooth surfaces, like glass or polished metal, reflect light sharply and clearly, while rough surfaces, like stone or fabric, scatter light more diffusely. Application. For smooth textures, use soft gradients and minimal texture. For rough textures, incorporate varied line work or stippling to represent surface irregularities. Tips: observe real-life textures and use reference images to guide your shading. Practice capturing the unique characteristics of each texture in your drawings. 2. Using contrast and detail. Texture is often conveyed through a combination of contrast and detail. High contrast can indicate a polished, reflective surface, while detailed, intricate shading can represent a textured surface. Application. Apply high contrast for glossy or reflective materials and detailed shading for more tactile textures. Adjust the level of detail based on the texture's complexity. Tips: balance contrast and detail to avoid overemphasizing texture or making it appear unnatural. Practice different textures to develop a keen eye for achieving realistic effects. Practical exercises. 1. Shading simple geometric shapes. Objective. Practice applying shading techniques to basic geometric shapes to understand light, shadow, and texture. Exercise. Draw basic shapes such as spheres, cubes, and cylinders. Use different shading techniques to represent various light sources and textures. Experiment with hatching, stippling, and blending to achieve realistic shading. Tips: focus on observing how light affects each shape differently. Pay attention to core shadows, cast shadows, and highlights, and practice creating smooth gradients and contrasts. 2. Applying shading techniques to basic forms. Objective. Apply shading techniques to more complex forms by combining basic shapes and textures. Exercise. Create a still life drawing or a simple scene incorporating multiple forms, such as a piece of fruit, a cup, or a simple character pose. Use the shading techniques learned to depict different textures and lighting conditions. Tips: combine different shading techniques to capture the complexity of the scene. Observe how different textures interact with light and adjust your shading approach accordingly. By mastering textural shading techniques and practicing with simple geometric shapes and basic forms, you'll enhance your ability to create realistic and dynamic drawings of characters like samurai from These exercises will help you apply shading effectively, capturing the unique textures and forms in your artwork. Introduction to adding details. Importance of details in enhancing realism and character. 1. Enhancing realism. Details are crucial for bringing a drawing to life. They add depth, texture, and specificity that help in creating a realistic portrayal of the subject. Small details like wrinkles, textures, and intricate patterns contribute significantly to how lifelike and believable the drawing appears. Application. When drawing samurai, adding details such as the texture of her clothing, the shine in her eyes, and the subtle folds in her hair will make the drawing more realistic and engaging. Details help in portraying her unique characteristics and bringing out the personality of the character. Tips. Focus on the key details that define the subject's look and personality. Avoid overwhelming the drawing with excessive details. Instead, prioritize elements that enhance the character's realism and emotional expression. 2. Adding character. Details also contribute to the character and mood of the drawing. They can convey emotions, age, and other personality traits that define the subject's individuality. Application. Incorporate unique features and stylistic elements that reflect samurai's character. This might include the specific style of her clothing, distinctive facial expressions, or particular accessories that add to her identity. Tips. Use details to enhance the character's story and background. Pay attention to how these details align with the overall narrative or setting of your drawing. Balance between detail and overall composition. 1. Ensuring cohesion. While details are important, they should not overshadow the overall composition of the drawing. Achieving a balance ensures that details complement rather than dominate the artwork. Application. When adding details, consider how they fit within the overall composition. For example, ensure that intricate patterns or textures do not detract from the focal points of your drawing, such as samurai's face or key features. Tips. Use details strategically to enhance focal areas while maintaining harmony throughout the composition. Evaluate the overall balance and make adjustments to ensure that the details integrate smoothly with the rest of the drawing. 2. Avoiding over-detailing. Over-detailing can lead to a cluttered and visually overwhelming drawing. It's important to focus on areas that benefit from additional detail while maintaining simplicity where necessary. Application. Apply detailed rendering to important areas such as the face and key features, while keeping other areas more abstract or less detailed. This helps in directing the viewer's attention to the main elements of the drawing. Tips. Regularly step back and assess your drawing as a whole. Determine if any areas are overly detailed or if additional detail might be needed to balance the composition. Drawing facial features. Detailed rendering of eyes, nose, and mouth. 1. Eyes. The eyes are often the focal point of a portrait and play a crucial role in conveying emotion and personality. Technique. Focus on capturing the shape, size, and placement of the eyes. Render the iris and pupil with careful attention to detail, including highlights and reflections that add depth. Use shading to depict the eyelids, and create subtle lines and textures around the eyes to enhance realism. Tips. Observe how light interacts with the eyes and apply shading accordingly. Pay attention to the unique characteristics of samurai's eyes and replicate them in your drawing for authenticity. 2. Nose. The nose is central to facial structure and requires accurate proportions and shading to integrate with the rest of the face. Technique. Draw the nose with attention to its shape and how it connects to the face. Use shading to depict the nasal bridge, nostrils, and the areas where light falls and cast shadows. Subtle shading can help in creating the illusion of depth and form. Tips. Study the proportions and anatomy of the nose to ensure accurate representation. Use light and shadow to define its shape and enhance its three-dimensional appearance. 3. Mouth. The mouth contributes significantly to facial expressions and character portrayal. Technique. Detail the shape of the lips, including the curves and lines that define their form. Use shading to show the folds and creases in the lips and to indicate how light and shadow interact with them. Pay attention to the subtle variations in tone that reflect the natural texture of the lips. Tips. Observe how the mouth moves with different expressions and replicate these nuances in your drawing. Ensure that the mouth aligns with the overall expression and mood of the character. Understanding proportions and placement. 1. Proportions. Accurate proportions are essential for creating a realistic and believable face. The positioning and size of facial features should align with established proportions to achieve a harmonious look. Technique. Use guidelines and reference points to ensure that features like the eyes, nose, and mouth are proportionate and correctly positioned. For instance, the eyes are typically placed halfway down the head, and the distance between the eyes is approximately one eye's width. Tips. Regularly check proportions as you draw and make adjustments as needed. Use reference images or grids to help maintain accurate proportions and placement. 2. Placement. Proper placement of facial features is crucial for capturing the character's likeness and expression. Technique. Align facial features according to the established proportions and ensure that they fit within the overall structure of the face. Pay attention to how features like the eyes and mouth align with the facial structure and expression. Tips. Use light sketching to position features accurately before finalizing the details. Make adjustments based on the character's expression and pose to ensure natural placement. Adding texture and subtle shading. 1. Adding texture. Texture adds realism to facial features by mimicking the surface quality of the skin and other elements. Technique. Use fine lines, stippling, or gentle shading to indicate texture in areas like the skin, lips, and eyes. Pay attention to small details such as pores, wrinkles, and the subtle variations in skin texture. Tips. Apply texture subtly to avoid overloading the drawing. Focus on key areas where texture adds realism and depth, and keep other areas smooth for contrast. 2. Subtle shading. Subtle shading helps in creating a smooth transition between light and shadow, enhancing the three-dimensional appearance of facial features. Technique. Use light, gradual shading to blend shadows and highlights seamlessly. Avoid harsh lines or abrupt changes in tone, and use blending tools to achieve smooth transitions. Tips. Build up shading gradually and use blending techniques to create a natural, cohesive look. Pay attention to how light affects different areas of the face and adjust shading accordingly. By focusing on details, proportions, and texture, you'll be able to create more realistic and expressive drawings of samurai from. These techniques will enhance the overall quality of your artwork and bring out the character's personality and depth. Texturing clothing and accessories. Techniques for fabric textures. 1. Wrinkles and folds. Fabric textures such as wrinkles and folds add realism and depth to clothing in your drawings. Understanding how to render these textures effectively enhances the believability of the clothing. Technique. Identify the light source. Determine how the light interacts with the folds and wrinkles. Light creates highlights on raised areas and casts shadows in the deeper folds. Draw the basic shapes. Sketch the primary lines of the folds and wrinkles first. Focus on how the fabric gathers and drapes. Add shading. Use smooth, gradual shading to depict how light and shadow play on the fabric. Darker shading represents deeper folds, while lighter shading indicates raised areas. Tips. Observe real fabric or reference images to understand how different types of fabrics fold and wrinkle. Practice drawing various types of fabric to capture their unique characteristics. 2. Patterns and textures. Patterns and textures on fabric, such as stripes, checks, or textures like denim, add complexity and interest to clothing. Technique. Draw the pattern. Begin by sketching the basic pattern on the fabric. Ensure that the pattern follows the folds and contours of the clothing. Add texture. Use shading techniques to emphasize the texture. For example, create a sense of weave or grain in fabrics like denim or wool by adding subtle linework or stippling. Tips. Ensure that patterns align correctly with the fabric's folds and shape. Use light and shadow to integrate patterns into the fabric's texture, ensuring they appear naturally part of the clothing. Shading metallic and reflective surfaces. 1. Metallic surfaces. Metallic surfaces reflect light differently than matte surfaces, requiring specific shading techniques to capture their shiny, reflective quality. Technique. Highlight and shadow. Focus on creating sharp highlights where light directly hits the metal and deep shadows where light is obstructed. The contrast between these areas enhances the reflective quality. Blending. Use smooth gradients to blend the transitions between highlights and shadows, mimicking the way light reflects off a curved metal surface. Tips. Observe how light interacts with real metallic surfaces. Pay attention to the sharpness of highlights and the smoothness of gradients to capture the reflective nature accurately. 2. Reflective surfaces. Reflective surfaces, such as glass or polished objects, require a careful approach to shading to depict their transparency and reflections. Technique. Reflections. Incorporate reflections of surrounding objects or light sources in the reflective surface. Use light shading and gradients to simulate transparency and depth. Highlight and shadow. Apply highlights and shadows based on the object's curvature and the light source. Reflective surfaces often have high contrast and subtle color shifts. Tips. Ensure that reflections are consistent with the surrounding environment. Use soft blending to achieve the transparent effect and avoid harsh lines. Hair detailing. Rendering different hair textures and styles. 1. Hair textures. Hair can vary from smooth and straight to curly and voluminous. Each texture requires a different approach to shading and detailing. Technique. Straight hair. Use long, flowing strokes to represent individual strands. Blend smoothly to capture the shine and softness of straight hair. Curly or wavy hair. Apply a mix of curved strokes and shading to convey the texture and volume. Emphasize the curl pattern and create shadows to indicate the hair's movement and body. Tips. Observe the specific texture of hair you're drawing. Use reference images to understand how light and shadow interact with different hair types. 2. Hairstyles. Different hairstyles require distinct shading and detailing techniques to capture their unique appearance and structure. Technique. Detailed styles. For complex hairstyles, break down the hair into manageable sections. Render each section with attention to the flow and volume, using layered strokes to build up texture. Simple styles. For simpler hairstyles, focus on basic shapes and smooth shading. Ensure that the hairstyle complements the character's overall look and expression. Tips. Practice drawing various hairstyles to develop versatility. Pay attention to how the hairstyle frames the face and enhances the character's personality. Techniques for highlighting and shading hair strands. 1. Highlighting hair strands. Highlights are essential for creating the illusion of light reflecting off hair, adding realism and depth. Technique. Identify light source. Determine where the light source is and apply highlights accordingly. Use a lighter pencil or eraser to create bright streaks on the hair strands. Layer highlights. Build up highlights gradually, blending with the surrounding hair to create a natural transition. Tips. Use varying levels of lightness to capture the natural shine of the hair. Avoid overdoing highlights. Subtlety is key for realistic results. 2. Shading hair strands. Shading helps in depicting the depth and volume of hair, contributing to the three-dimensional appearance. Technique. Apply base shading. Start with a light base shade to define the overall tone of the hair. Gradually build up darker shades to create depth and dimension. Use directional strokes. Shade hair strands in the direction of their natural flow to enhance realism. Blend shadows smoothly to avoid harsh lines. Tips. Focus on creating smooth transitions between light and dark areas. Use blending tools to achieve a cohesive look and emphasize the natural flow of the hair. By mastering texturing techniques for clothing and accessories, and refining your approach to hair detailing, you'll be able to create more lifelike and dynamic drawings of samurai from. These skills will enhance your ability to depict various textures and styles effectively, contributing to a more polished and realistic final artwork. Finishing touches. Adding final details and highlights. 1. Adding final details. The final stage of drawing involves refining the details to enhance realism and ensure that every aspect of the drawing is well defined and complete. Technique. Refine textures. Go over areas like clothing, hair, and facial features to add any last-minute details that enhance texture and depth. Add fine lines, subtle shading, or small details that may have been missed earlier. Enhance features. Focus on key areas such as the eyes, mouth, and any distinct elements of samurai's attire. Ensure that all essential features are crisp and clearly defined. Tips. Take breaks and return to the drawing with fresh eyes to spot any areas that need refinement. Use a magnifying glass or zoom in to ensure precision in fine details. 2. Adding highlights. Highlights bring out the lightest parts of your drawing, adding realism and depth to the final piece. Technique. Use white pencil or gel pen. Apply a white pencil or gel pen to add bright highlights where light hits the surfaces most intensely. This could include areas such as the shine on hair, the glint in the eyes, or reflections on metallic surfaces. Create contrast. Use highlights to create contrast with darker areas, emphasizing the three-dimensionality of your drawing. Tips. Apply highlights sparingly to avoid overdoing them. Focus on areas where light naturally creates the most contrast. Layer highlights gradually to achieve a smooth and realistic effect. 3. Balancing overall detail with the drawing. Balancing detail. Ensuring that the level of detail complements the overall composition is crucial for a cohesive final piece. Technique. Evaluate composition. Assess the drawing as a whole to determine if any areas have too much or too little detail. Balance the level of detail across different parts of the drawing to maintain harmony and focus. Adjust as needed. Make adjustments to areas that seem too busy or too plain. Blend or simplify details to achieve a balanced and cohesive look. Tips. Use a step-back approach to review the drawing from a distance. This helps in identifying areas that need adjustment and ensures that the overall composition is visually appealing. Practical exercises. Detailed study of samurai from 1. Study samurai's features. Conduct a detailed study of samurai, focusing on her unique characteristics, attire, and style. Exercise. Reference analysis. Use reference images of samurai to analyze her features, clothing, and hairstyle. Pay attention to details such as facial expressions, textures, and patterns. Sketching practice. Create detailed sketches of different parts of samurai, focusing on capturing her likeness and the intricate details of her design. Tips. Compare your sketches with reference images to ensure accuracy. Practice drawing various elements separately before integrating them into the final composition. Applying detailed techniques to different parts of the drawing. 1. Detail application. Apply the detailed techniques learned throughout the course to different sections of the drawing to enhance realism and cohesion. Exercise. Section focus. Work on specific parts of the drawing, such as the eyes, clothing, or hair, applying detailed shading, texture, and highlights to each area. Ensure that each section is well defined and integrates smoothly with the rest of the drawing. Review and adjust. Continuously review the drawing as you add details, making adjustments to ensure that each part harmonizes with the overall composition. Tips. Focus on one section at a time to maintain quality and consistency. Regularly step back to assess the overall balance and make necessary refinements. By focusing on finishing touches and practical exercises, you'll be able to refine your drawing of samurai from, enhancing the overall quality and ensuring that all details contribute to a cohesive and realistic final piece. Finally, we'll cover the essentials of inking. Introduction to inking. Inking is a crucial step in the drawing process, particularly in comic art, manga, and detailed illustrations. It serves as the bridge between rough sketches and the final polished artwork. Inking is the process of refining the outlines of a drawing with clean, defined lines. These lines enhance the clarity and visual impact of the artwork, making it ready for printing or digital display. The primary purpose of inking is to bring out the intricacies of the drawing, solidify the composition, and prepare it for coloring or other finishing touches. Inking not only emphasizes the details but also adds contrast and depth, which can significantly affect the mood and readability of the artwork. Whether working traditionally or digitally, the choice of inking tools and techniques will influence the final appearance of your illustration. Inking tools and materials. Traditional inking tools. 1. Pens. Traditional inking pens come in various types, each offering different line qualities and effects. Fineliners. These pens have a fine, consistent tip, ideal for detailed line work and precision. They are commonly used in comic books and manga for their reliability and ease of use. Popular brands include Micron and Stettler. Brush pens. These pens provide a range of line widths and can mimic the effects of a traditional brush. They are useful for adding dynamic, expressive lines and for creating variations in line thickness. Brands like Pentel and Tombow are well regarded. 2. Inks. The type of ink you choose can affect the look and feel of your final artwork. India ink. Known for its deep, rich black color and permanence, India ink is a staple for many artists. It is suitable for both detailed and broad strokes and can be used with various tools, including brushes and pens. Acrylic ink. This type of ink is versatile and can be used on a variety of surfaces. It dries quickly and is water-resistant, making it a good choice for illustrations that require durability and longevity. 3. Paper. The choice of paper is crucial for achieving the desired inking results. Paper quality. High quality, smooth paper is ideal for inking as it allows for clean, crisp lines and reduces the risk of bleeding or feathering. Bristol board and heavyweight sketch paper are popular choices among inking artists. Texture. The texture of the paper can influence the outcome of the inking process. A smooth surface is preferred for fine line work, while a textured paper might be used for a more organic or textured look. Digital inking tools. 1. Software. Digital inking has become increasingly popular due to its convenience and the range of tools available. Photoshop. Adobe Photoshop is a versatile program used for various artistic processes, including inking. It offers a range of brushes and tools that can mimic traditional inking techniques while allowing for easy adjustments and corrections. Clip Studio Paint. This software is specifically designed for comic and manga artists. It includes a range of inking tools and features such as vector layers and customizable brushes, making it ideal for detailed line work. 2. Hardware. The choice of hardware can greatly impact the ease and efficiency of digital inking. Tablets. Graphics tablets such as those from Wacom or Wien provide a natural drawing experience with pressure sensitivity and customizable settings. They allow for precise control over line quality and stroke width. Styluses. A good stylus is crucial for accurate inking. Styluses with varying tip sizes and pressure sensitivity can help achieve different line effects and mimic traditional tools. Inking techniques. In addition to the tools and materials, mastering various inking techniques is essential for achieving professional results. Techniques such as line variation, cross-hatching, and stippling can add depth and texture to your artwork. Practice and experimentation with these techniques will help you develop your own style and enhance the quality of your inking work. By understanding and effectively utilizing the right tools and techniques, you can elevate your artwork from rough sketches to refined, impactful illustrations. Whether you choose traditional or digital methods, the key is to find what works best for your style and project needs. Preparing your drawing. Before diving into the inking process, it is essential to prepare your drawing properly. This preparation ensures that the final lines are clean, intentional, and enhance the overall quality of your artwork. Creating a clean sketch. A clean, well-defined sketch serves as the foundation for effective inking. The importance of this stage cannot be overstated, as it sets the stage for the final artwork. 1. Drafting your sketch. Start with a light, loose sketch to outline your composition and capture the basic forms. This initial sketch helps you plan the placement of elements and ensure proper proportions. 2. Refining the sketch. Once you're satisfied with the basic structure, refine your sketch by adding details and correcting any errors. Use a light hand to keep lines subtle, which will make the inking process smoother. 3. Final cleanup. Erase any unnecessary or overlapping lines that may interfere with the inking. Ensure that your final sketch is clear and easy to follow. The cleaner your sketch, the easier it will be to achieve clean, precise ink lines. Choosing your lines. Deciding which lines to emphasize and which to omit is crucial in creating a visually appealing and effective inking result. 1. Emphasizing key lines. Focus on the lines that define the primary shapes and important details of your drawing. These lines should be more prominent and well defined to guide the viewer's eye and emphasize the main elements of your artwork. 2. Omitting unnecessary lines. Avoid inking lines that do not contribute to the overall composition or clarity of the drawing. Reducing unnecessary lines helps prevent clutter and maintains the focus on the essential aspects of your illustration. 3. Enhancing details. Use varying line thicknesses and techniques to highlight important details and create a sense of depth. This selective emphasis adds visual interest and guides the viewer through the artwork. Inking techniques. Mastering various inking techniques can significantly enhance the quality of your artwork. These techniques include line variation, line quality, pressure control, and inking over sketches. Line variation. Line variation involves using different line thicknesses to add depth and emphasis to your drawing. 1. Thick versus thin lines. Thick lines. Use thicker lines to define primary elements and areas that are closer to the viewer. Thick lines can convey weight, strength, and importance, making certain parts of the drawing stand out. Thin lines. Employ thinner lines for finer details, textures, and elements that are farther away or less critical. Thin lines provide delicate and intricate details without overpowering the composition. 2. Creating depth and emphasis. By varying line thickness, you can create a sense of depth and focus. Thicker lines can suggest shadow or proximity, while thinner lines can imply distance or lightness. Line quality. Line quality refers to the smoothness and consistency of your lines, which greatly affects the overall appearance of your artwork. 1. Smooth lines. Achieving smooth, consistent lines requires practice and control. Focus on creating fluid strokes without breaks or wobbles, which helps maintain a professional and polished look. 2. Consistent pressure. Apply consistent pressure when inking to avoid uneven lines. Practice drawing straight and curved lines to build muscle memory and improve your line quality. Pressure control. Controlling pressure is crucial for achieving varying line widths and effects. 1. Adjusting pressure. Vary the pressure on your pen or stylus to create different line widths. Light pressure produces thinner lines, while more force results in thicker lines. Practice controlling pressure to achieve the desired line effects. 2. Creating dynamic lines. Use pressure variation to add dynamic qualities to your lines, such as adding weight to shadows or highlights. This technique enhances the visual impact of your artwork and adds interest. Inking over sketches. Inking over sketches requires careful handling to avoid smudging and ensure accuracy. 1. Following the sketch. Begin inking by following the clean, defined lines of your sketch. Use a steady hand and avoid pressing too hard to prevent smudging or bleeding. 2. Enhancing details. As you ink, enhance the details of your sketch by adding refined lines and adjustments. Focus on refining the key lines and adding depth where needed. 3. Layering and corrections. If working digitally, use layers to separate your ink work from the sketch. This allows for easy corrections and adjustments without affecting the original sketch. By preparing your drawing effectively and employing these inking techniques, you can create clean, professional quality artwork that highlights the details and enhances the overall visual impact of your illustrations. Inking process. The inking process involves several key steps to transform your clean sketch into a finished, polished illustration. This process includes outlining, adding details, using hatching techniques, and correcting any mistakes. Outlining. 1. Starting with the main outlines. Begin inking by focusing on the primary outlines of your drawing. These outlines define the overall shape and structure of your illustration. Choosing the right pen or brush, select a tool that matches the scale and detail level of your drawing. For large areas or bold outlines, use a thicker pen or brush. For smaller, intricate sections, opt for finer tools. Consistent stroke. Maintain a consistent stroke when outlining to ensure uniformity. Use steady, deliberate movements to create clean, even lines. 2. Defining major elements. Emphasize the main components of your drawing, such as the character's silhouette or important objects. This establishes the foundation for adding finer details later. Adding details. 1. Techniques for inking finer details. Once the main outlines are complete, focus on adding finer details and textures. Detailed line work. Use a finer pen or brush to add intricate details, such as facial features, fabric folds, or background elements. Pay attention to the areas where details will enhance the overall composition. Texture creation. Create textures by varying your line work. For example, short, stippled lines can represent rough surfaces, while smooth, flowing lines can indicate soft textures. 2. Layering details. Build up details gradually, starting with the most critical elements. Add layers of detail as needed to achieve the desired level of complexity and depth. Using hatching and cross-hatching. 1. Hatching techniques. Hatching involves drawing parallel lines to create shading and texture. Single hatching. Use evenly spaced parallel lines to shade areas of your drawing. Adjust the spacing and line thickness to control the shading intensity. Layered hatching. Overlay multiple layers of hatching lines in different directions to create more complex textures and shading. 2. Cross-hatching techniques. Cross-hatching involves layering intersecting lines to add depth and shading. Basic cross-hatching. Draw a series of parallel lines in one direction, then add another set of lines crossing them. This technique builds up areas of shadow and depth. Advanced cross-hatching. Vary the angle, spacing, and density of your lines to create more nuanced shading effects. Correcting mistakes. 1. Fixing common inking errors. Mistakes during inking can be corrected with a few techniques. Smudges and unwanted marks. If using traditional tools, carefully erase smudges without disturbing the ink lines. For digital inking, use the undo function or a digital eraser to correct errors. Uneven lines. Redraw or adjust uneven lines to match the desired consistency. For digital artwork, you can use tools to smooth out lines and correct imperfections. 2. Making corrections. For significant mistakes, you may need to redo sections of your inking. Take your time to ensure corrections are seamlessly integrated into the existing artwork. Final touches. After completing the inking process, the final touches are crucial to refine and enhance your artwork. Cleaning up. 1. Removing pencil lines and imperfections. Traditional methods. Gently erase any remaining pencil lines from your drawing, being careful not to smudge the inked areas. Use a soft eraser to avoid damaging the paper. Digital methods. In digital artwork, hide or delete the sketch layer once you've finished inking. Use the eraser tool to clean up any stray lines or imperfections. 2. Final review. Inspect your artwork for any remaining issues and make final adjustments to ensure a clean and polished appearance. Enhancing contrast. 1. Adjusting contrast. Enhance the contrast of your ink lines to make them stand out. Traditional methods. Ensure your ink lines are dark and crisp by using high-quality black ink. Scan the artwork at high resolution to maintain line quality. Digital methods. Use contrast adjustment tools in your digital software to make the ink lines pop. Increase the contrast to make lines more pronounced and reduce any graying or blending. 2. Checking overall balance. Adjust the contrast and levels to ensure that the entire artwork has a balanced and cohesive look. Digital refinement. 1. Final touches in digital software. Cleaning up. Use digital tools to refine and clean up your lines, removing any stray marks or inconsistencies. Adding effects. Utilize digital brushes and tools to add final touches such as texture or additional effects. Experiment with layers to enhance the overall appearance of your artwork. 2. Saving and exporting. Save your artwork in the appropriate format for your intended use, whether for print or digital display. Export high-resolution files to preserve the quality of your inking. By carefully following these steps in the inking process and final touches, you can achieve a well-crafted, polished piece of artwork that highlights your drawing skills and brings your creative vision to life. Practice and application. Mastering inking involves both practice and studying existing styles. Here's how you can improve your skills and apply what you've learned. Exercises. Practicing different inking techniques through targeted exercises can help you build proficiency and confidence. 1. Line variation exercise. Objective. Develop control over line thickness and variation. Activity. Draw a series of shapes, circles, squares, etc., and fill them with lines of varying thicknesses. Practice creating smooth transitions between thick and thin lines. Tip. Focus on maintaining consistent pressure and controlling your tool to achieve the desired line effects. 2. Detail inking exercise. Objective. Improve your ability to add fine details. Activity. Choose a detailed image, such as a close-up of a character's face or a complex pattern, and practice inking the intricate elements. Pay attention to texture and small features. Tip. Use a fine-tipped pen or brush to capture subtle details and refine your technique. 3. Hatching and cross-hatching exercise. Objective. Learn to create shading and texture using hatching techniques. Activity. Draw a series of shading samples using single hatching, cross-hatching, and layered hatching. Experiment with different angles and spacing to see how they affect the shading. Tip. Practice varying the density and direction of your hatching to achieve different shading effects. 4. Correcting mistakes exercise. Objective. Develop techniques for fixing common inking errors. Activity. Create a series of inked drawings with intentional mistakes, e.g., uneven lines, smudges. Practice correcting these issues using both traditional and digital methods. Tip. Use correction tools and techniques to seamlessly fix errors without affecting the overall quality of the artwork. Case studies. Analyzing and learning from existing inking styles in anime and manga can provide valuable insights and inspiration. 1. Studying classic manga artists. Objective. Understand traditional inking techniques used by renowned manga artists. Activity. Examine the work of artists like Osamu Tezuka, Masashi Kishimoto, and Akira Toriyama. Analyze their use of line variation, texture, and shading. Tip. Take note of how these artists use lines to convey emotion, depth, and movement in their characters and scenes. 2. Analyzing modern anime styles. Objective. Explore contemporary inking styles and trends in anime. Activity. Look at modern anime and manga artists such as Tite Kubo or Gurgur Akutami. Study their approach to inking, including how they handle dynamic poses, backgrounds, and special effects. Tip. Observe how modern artists use digital tools and techniques to enhance their inking process and add unique effects. 3. Comparing different genres. Objective. Understand how inking styles vary across different genres. Activity. Compare the inking styles used in genres such as shonen, shoujo, and seinen. Analyze how line quality, texture, and detail differ based on the genre's aesthetic and thematic needs. Tip. Consider how the genre influences the overall inking approach and how you can adapt these styles to suit your own work. Conclusion. Recap of key points. To master inking, it's crucial to focus on the following essential techniques. Outlining. Start with clean, well-defined main outlines to establish the drawing's structure. Adding details. Use fine lines and textures to enhance the complexity and depth of your artwork. Hatching and cross-hatching. Apply shading techniques to add dimension and depth. Correcting mistakes. Develop skills to fix common errors and maintain the integrity of your inking. Encouragement to practice. Continuous practice is vital to refining your inking skills. Regularly engage in exercises, study various inking styles, and apply what you've learned to your own work. Over time, you'll develop a unique inking style and achieve greater confidence and precision in your artwork. Remember, the journey to mastering inking is ongoing, and each drawing is an opportunity to improve. Keep experimenting, practicing, and learning from others to elevate your skills and achieve your artistic goals.